Days were seemingly getting longer, but I couldn't help feel the self-imposed weight of pressure. The hike in was a handful, no doubt, and I'd be trapped on this trail for the better part of an hour. The silver lining of the scenery around was at least soft on the eyes and well worth the walk. Just from what I've seen and heard, this was the place you wanted to be if brook trout was your business.
I think this is it. If I had to guess. Oh, there's a fish right there. Look at you, Magoo. It's always a fish at the crossing hole.
The boys in powder blue tossing the rock over in Chapel Hill, or those faithful brothers in flight, are often the images conjured up when thinking of number 12 in the Union. But with well over 3,000 miles of trout streams running through North Carolina, in many circles, this is considered the center hub of Southern Appalachian angling. All throughout the year, folks flock to Asheville, Bryson City, and Boone alike, looking to get on a bite. The Tuckasegee and Nantahala River are quite well known, along with others like Davidson and South Mills Creek. But most of those contain non-native trout species like rainbows or browns, and that's not really what I'm after.
I mean, how is a fella supposed to fish this, man? This is ridiculous.
The native populations of brook trout in North Carolina are primarily found in the central Piedmont region and especially in the more mountainous portions of the far western end of the state. With the Great Smoky Mountain National Park and large sections of national forest preserving valuable headwater streams, North Carolina state fish has managed to hold out better than most. Those faint shadows moving amongst the sand, gosh, it had to be made by the torpedo-like shape of a trout, or that's at least what I told myself. I was beginning to question the claims of robust populations with each empty cast. The night was young, and I had a feeling something was bound to bite. I just had to be in the right place at the right time. Yes! Man, it may not show, but I really had to work for this one, and it's a shame to think I've got the wrong fish. I could easily sit here and claim that this was my first Southern Appalachian brook trout here in North Carolina, but I'd be lying to you, and I'd be lying to myself. Subtle differences, criticized by the more experienced eye, might be able to distinguish this imposter. I'm not that guy, so I'll go ahead and lean on historic stocking records as my guiding light. This beautiful wild brook trout is simply the remnants of a northern strain fish that was stocked over southern genetics many decades ago. Looks like my hunt for the southern strain still continues.
Oh my God, you're so big. Oh my gosh. Why are you this big? That's unreasonably big. Bufo, my goodness gracious. What?
In the world of shifting baselines, it's important to recognize that being the best of the worst still isn't all that great. Despite this state being at the forefront of Southern Appalachian brook trout management, my pointless hike out was rather melancholy knowing the towering hurdles a lot of these isolated populations still needed to jump over. In order to avoid being hyperbolic of the situation as a whole, let me show you what I was able to see throughout my time here in the Tar Heel State. Getting up and out well before the sun, my goal for the day was to run fast towards the sound of rushing water. To my right, paralleling this wide earthen trail, was supposed to be one of, if not the best wild brook trout stream in the entire Nantahala National Forest. It could have been the excited nerves of a new adventure or the growing incline, but my palms were starting to sweat and I was already on my second layer shed of the morning. I thought it peculiar at the time. This path to the headwaters was wide and really well maintained, all things considered. Almost immediately my hackles were up and my gut feeling was screaming out that there must have been some sort of industry presence before this belonged to the National Forest. Sure as the sun, a bit of research revealed that prior to the 1920s, logging companies had cut their way deep into the heart of this ominous land. Tough to tell if the series of culverts diverting flows were part of the original road build. It's been so long, they very well could have been installed by the Forest Service of yesteryear. This old car, however, yeah, that jalopy was most certainly a relic of more industrial times. Who knows how many years of old growth this rusty box of metal dragged out throughout its life. Almost ironic to think of its now idle state. Without a doubt, its fate was sealed, never to be moved again. Distractions aside, I was making good time as the deafening sound of falling water came in and then faded out. During the research process, I found that 3 large waterfalls in Big Snowbird Creek act as the natural barriers that have managed to protect the native brook trout from the incursion of downstream invaders. The lower and middle fall sections are supposed to have some good fish, but I wanted to get above as many cascades as possible and see the most undisturbed and seldom fished for char. With the sunbeams reaching through the trees and biting at my heels, I buckled down and pushed hard to finish out the last few miles of this hike.
Well, the trail is taking me up a series of switchbacks. The river is way down there. I'm high up on the hill, and holy cow, this is kicking my butt. Hey, bear. Hey, bear. Hopefully it is all downhill from here. Good Lord. It's funny, the further up I've gone, the more wilderness this trail's become. It's not very well maintained, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of folks make it up this way. Now that's a set of falls. Holy cow. Yeah, that's a nice natural barrier. Jeez Louise. Wow. Yeah, I think this will do. It's beautiful. Alright, waiting booths are on. It's time to catch some fish.
Or at least I thought it was time to catch fish. I did my best to scan the water with a critical gaze, hoping for a visible twitch in the shadows. Ginger steps jostled for solid footing amongst the stream bed boulders to no real effect. I've heard you can't surprise a phantom. Trying to sneak up on something that just isn't there, it really felt silly. Hailing from Missouri, I'm a show-me guy to my core, and right now, Big Snowbird wasn't giving me anything to work with. Could it still be too early for these fish? That's usually my knee-jerk reaction, but it just doesn't seem right. If there were fish present at the higher elevations, everything in me thought they'd be more than willing to pick up what I was putting down. Still holding a skunk, I remember seeing piled up leaves back on the trail, and now that had me worried as well. Not but a few days ago, a torrential downpour came through and put most of western North Carolina in a watery chokehold. Sitting on my porch, I contemplated how the quantity and speed at which the clouds poured over the land was like nothing I'd ever seen. Severe flash flooding is one of the natural threats to brook trout populations in this part of the world. In one foul swoop, entire generations can be washed away in seconds. How ironic would it be if I hiked all this way just to fish an empty stream? Continuing upstream efforts, I switched back and forth between my solo dry fly rod and the trusty dry dropper to only be met with silence as I aimlessly stumbled on. Man, what gives? Looking in the water, I could see a fair amount of bug life and what looked to be some smaller forage fish too. I would hate to be critical, but my bugs were almost a 1-for-1 match of what was clinging to the rocks. Right as the vines of frustration started to creep in and coil like kudzu, a flash of crimson woke up my tired eyes, and that heavy skunk was no longer sitting so hard on my shoulders. I tell you what, the sharp reds contrasting against the deep olive were something the camera just couldn't quite do justice. I really wish y'all could have seen this work of art with your own 2 eyes. Talk about a fine specimen to document for my first official Southern Appalachian brook trout here in North Carolina. This relic of the past shot back into the fast water, no worse for wear, and now I had high hopes I'd be seeing a few more of his friends as the day grew long.
Nice. It's a tangibly better fish.
Taking a much needed load off, rehydrating was at the top of my to-do list, and I couldn't help but ponder the day up until this point. Sitting down and observing things around me, it seemed as though the underbrush bordering the creek began to move in unison. All it took was the soft kiss of springtime sun to kickstart the engine of life up in the hills. Terrestrial bug life was abound, and there seemed to be quite a few aquatic insects hatching, or attempting to hatch in the now midday warmth. Lesson learned. If there are no bugs moving in the cold of dawn, then why would any self-respecting brook trout be looking to the surface for a meal? There was no end of hydro pocket hideaways to just hunker down behind and linger long until lunch. This morning, it must have been a fluke, and witnessing all this in front of me was proof enough. Now, I could be off on that assumption, but I wasn't going to let that stop my upstream march. I was here for one reason, and I still had more North Carolina brook trout to rope in. The more I pushed into the headwaters, the better and better the water seemed to be. A painful pit of regret started to grow in my stomach, knowing that my impatience earlier in the day meant I was going to miss out on some really fine water. This was another prime pool, and just from a quick scan, I could tell there might be a fish or two down there. At this point, I was casting with confidence, and I was nearly sure of a hookup, but I wasn't expecting to catch my favorite fish of the day. Hopefully you can notice that there are slight variations displayed in each of the clades. Subtle as they may seem, something about the phenotype differences in the Tar Heel trout truly stuck out. Those blue halos hovered so faint around the scarlet speckles, and the oblong yellow and olive spots seemed to rain down from the vermiculated clouds lining the muscular back. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd hate to project, but in my mind, this is a speckled trout well worth any amount of miles. What an absolute gem. As he slid back, it has to be acknowledged that I probably could have brought quite a few more fish to hand. I simply just whiffed or was too slow. A few of these empty swings were no doubt pushing that 10 to 12 inch range, which again is about as good as you can do in this corner of the world. The sting of that loss would have been made a whole lot worse if not for the ones I did manage to get to the net. This fine specimen was set to be the last one of the day. As I gazed past the plexiglass, there was an internal wrestling match with the many different thoughts running through my mind. How old was this fish? And how long had he and his ancestors been trapped up here? And most of all, were your genetics still pure from the Pleistocene? Those menacing waterfalls would be difficult for any critter to get up and around, so the prospect of isolation stuck in my craw while I cradled him for the final release. Good luck down there, buddy.
Alright, just dropped everything. This is where I set up this morning and started fishing, so I'm gonna break everything down, change, and get the heck out of here, because this is gonna be a long hike back.
Well, all the books and articles, they weren't lying. This was one of the best representations I'd seen so far of a healthy, high-elevation brook trout fishery. Where I was set to go next, well, it couldn't be much further from Big Snowbird Creek. This concept of delayed harvest isn't something you run across all too much west of the Mississippi, but many an Asheville angler clued me in on the various forks of the Mills River system and said it'd be worth a look. Full transparency, these kind of streams, they aren't really my cup of tea, but I had an extra evening and my good buddy Matt was traveling through the area for work, so we decided to link up. What could be the harm of one quick evening session?
Oh shit. Do you see that? There's a 12-inch brook trout like right there. That's too funny. He was just chilling right here. Oh, there goes another one. I guess, no, dude, we've spooked him for sure. I say let's keep moving up.
Months prior, during my extensive research phase for this entire journey, I determined it would be in my best interest to avoid these kind of creeks. Wild and native brook trout were my primary goal, so I've got to imagine those haven't been present in a watershed like this for many generations. Completely shifting gears from wild, high-elevation fish, I had to reach deep into my stock trout duffel bag to trick some of these cement-raised and highly pressured fish. Well, the skunk was off, but at what cost? This was technically the biggest brook trout I've caught this entire trip, but I can't say I looked at this mutant with any sort of accomplishment. Good luck down there, dude.
Jeez. Oh man, that was so sick. If he could do that again, I'll zoom right in on his ass. Oh my god, that was so cool. Golly Jones, there he was again. I mean, just last second he wants it. There he goes.
My bias is certainly showing here because I'm bemoaning the tug of yet another artificial brook trout. The droopy dorsal and mostly faded colors just seem to spit in the face of all the wild populations I'd worked so hard to document up until this point. Fairly skinny and clearly desperate for any flashy scrap of food, I've gotta ask myself, would this fish even be worth keeping for the skillet? When they do eventually open it up to the hordes of folks looking to harvest these holdovers, he might not be anything but skin and bones. Matt and I finished out our short session with a few more bites, but couldn't quite get anything else to stick. Even though we had the evening bite on our side, each pool fished like pressured water. And we could easily see 5 to 10 trout all around the same size in just about every hole. Chances are they'd seen plenty of flies today and over the entirety of their bleak lives as cannon fodder.
Well, for just a couple hours, that was pretty fun.
Before I dive right in, I'd like to be fully transparent here. I'm so far from a classically trained biologist or economist, so anyone not really digging what I'm yapping about over the next few minutes, please feel free to dismiss my silly thesis. In my defense, however, I do like to read, and I've acquired some basic skills in deduction as I've juggled issues like this throughout my life. The more winters I've seen, the more confusing trout management all gets to me. If you'll be so kind as to offer me your ear and an open mind, I'd really like to discuss a few things. The definition of carrying capacity goes as follows: the maximum population size of a species that a particular environment can sustain indefinitely. If we were to go underneath the surface again at Big Snowbird Creek, you can see a mostly empty stream bed. While fishing there, the most I would pull out of any given hole was maybe 2 fish. Granted, there could have been a few more brook trout of various sizes all throughout that just simply didn't bite. My point here is that in one of the healthiest brook trout streams in all of North Carolina, there might have been less than 5 fish, all well under that 12-inch mark. The population of fish adhered to this concept of carrying capacity. Comparing Big Snowbird's best to the similar sized runs at the delayed harvest doppelganger of North Mills, we could easily see 5 to 10 fish of varying species, all well over that 12-inch length distinction in almost every single hole. And that's just what we saw. Who knows how many others were lurking just out of sight. Hopefully you're following along, but to those that are still wondering why this even matters, well, these Southern Appalachian streams have many natural limiting factors leading to the distributions and sizes of fish to be more closely represented by that of wild streams like Big Snowbird. In most of the systems, you can look at things like the general lack of space being one of these massive limiters.
Things got way too narrow, so I guess it's game over for this section.
In general, the water that can support trout tends to be small, fast, and narrow. These high elevation streams couldn't be any different from the stereotypical images that haunt our angling dreams. Quote unquote trout streams in the western United States are a completely different beast. Plain and simple, the little holes that fish can sit in comfortably are few and far between. Well, relatively. Okay, so there's one, but by far the most evident limiting factor that I was able to point my finger at was simply the scarcity of food. When you turn over rocks in these higher elevation systems, there are, well, bugs. Quite a few different species, in fact, there just aren't that many of them. Quantity, yes. Quality, no. Make sense? Even when you bump above the macroinvertebrate level on the food chain, there aren't that many other fish species present. Hell, you'd have a better chance of running into any number of salamander species well before smaller fish. Okay, so why do I bring all this up? Please bear with me. And remember, I'm not a biologist, but my beef with the massive stocking efforts across the region all stem from the concept of carrying capacity. It is my greatly uneducated opinion that dumping in all these stock trout disrupts the carrying capacity and has an adverse effect on the stream ecology as a whole. Be it bugs, native fish, all the salamanders, they're either outcompeted or overpredated due to the imbalance of apex predators. And for what? That's the question I always return to. Unfortunately, and not too dissimilar from many things in life, money is often where this question leads me. There's serious incentive for all the state agencies in the region to sell fishing licenses. While I was witnessing all this, I had the unique opportunity to talk to quite a few individuals on the state level that deal with cold water resource management. Now, I am not at liberty to name names or call out states, but I can specifically remember having hours of quote-unquote off-the-record conversations about the hypocrisy of management practices. Basically, what I gathered is that they have to serve the lowest common denominator in pursuit of selling the maximum number of fishing licenses. Providing opportunities for anglers, no matter how damaging to the overall environment, was by far the highest on their priority list. It was only after hours of back and forth phone conversations did we eventually get to the topic of health and conservation of native fish species, which I have to admit was quite deflating. I can understand where their hands get tied because money makes the world go round. That's just the damn truth. When these agencies don't get properly funded and there's an overwhelming amount of resources to be managed, I can certainly see where other priorities take precedence. Granted, I've heard and read plenty about the economic breakdown of these hatchery systems and what each of these stockfish actually cost the end user. And that's not to mention a limited shelf life once they reach their final destination and the adverse long-term effects on native fish. I mean, I could go on and on because it never really makes sense to me. But this leads to the last issue of this whole stocking and carrying capacity rant, that being the historic nature of it all.
Oh no, it's a little rainbow. Gosh darn it.
When you run across fish like this, objectively, this is a stunning wild rainbow trout. Tough to say where this little guy's ancestors came from. Maybe Northern California, hey, maybe Canada. Hell, he could have some Alaska in him. Again, tough to say, but what I can say is that all this fish has ever known is a Southern Appalachian stream. I'd put good money down to say that this rainbow's lineage, and others like it, have been swimming wild for longer than most of you watching have been alive. Non-native rainbow and brown trout put a crazy amount of pressure on the already stray native brook trout. Filling in a similar niche, these outsiders outcompete and often prey upon juvenile brook trout. So even if stocking efforts have stopped in certain systems, these wild invaders still adhere to this concept of carrying capacity, and because of the general public's general need for something bigger in the skillet or spunkier for the sport, we all now have to lie in this invasive bed that our great-grandparents made for us, the sheets of which continue to encroach upon and suffocate what little airspace is left. It's truly depressing when you pull up a map of the miles and miles of trout streams all across the region that have been invaded by rainbows, browns, and northern strain brook trout, all because of stocking, both current and historic. For the third and final time, I'm not a biologist and I don't control the budgets for these state agencies. At the end of the day, I'm just some dude who, again, knows how to read and likes to fish. I do really hope this doesn't sound too critical, and by no means is this complex issue solved by shutting down all the hatcheries tomorrow. There would need to see a much wider shift in the general angling culture and sentiment of many across the region. I find that raising awareness to all this is the best place to start. I've got high hopes that I'll be able to see a day where quality is held as a higher value over quantity. Wondering what that might actually look like, my mind drifts to a certain national park not too far away that might be able to help paint this picture of a brighter brook trout future.